Okay, so you notice your dismissive avoidant partner follows other attractive people on Instagram, and maybe it feels personal. But is it? Where should your boundaries actually be? And what is truly healthy in this situation? I want to be clear that this is not something all dismissive avoidants do, but I would say this is kind of a 50-50 skew. 50% of dismissive avoidants don't even have Instagram, don't even use it, or not interested. And 50% of dismissive avoidants tend to be the ones that may be the very people following everybody else that they find attractive. So in today's video, we are going to cover first and foremost 3 major reasons why this happens if it's happening to you. Then we're going to talk about 3 things you can do to address this situation and the neuroscience of how this kind of stuff impacts people and relationships. And then if you like this stuff in a fun, non-dogmatic way, we'll talk about how neuroscience actually overlaps with ancient wisdom to give us some really important findings. Here's the first thing. For dismissive avoidance, following Instagram models or attractive people on Instagram is usually about escapism, not necessarily some kind of attraction to replace another person. And that is usually because dismissive avoidants are seeking to soothe through creature comforts, through other external distractions. But that doesn't mean that this makes for a comfortable situation to be on the receiving end of, or even for any kind of healthy relationship. And dismissive avoidants may seek fantasy or distraction when intimacy feels overwhelming. So one of the big things dismissive avoidants do is they try to actually minimize their attachment needs to their partner as a way of staying safe and essentially afloat when vulnerability or commitment feel demanding and overwhelming for them. Again, absolutely not saying that this is okay or a healthy response, but it's helpful to just understand the mechanics of what's going on first. And a lot of times people who are on the receiving end of this will say things like, oh my gosh, this person must not find me attractive. And so they have to look at other people on Instagram to make up for that they're not getting their needs met in the relationship. And all of these fears come to light for people. And while we're going to talk about how to address those things in a really deep way in just a moment, I just want people listening to know it's less about you and it's more about the dismissive avoidant themselves avoiding vulnerability in the relationship. But again, it doesn't make it a healthy thing. So let's talk about some of the neuroscience of what happens. There's a study done at the University of Alabama by Berridge and Robinson, who came up with something known as the incentive sensitization theory, which actually shows that dopamine wanting is fueled by novelty more than actual satisfaction. In other words, the novelty of coming across somebody new or looking at something new and different is often something that may fuel dopamine, but not actually reflect a sense of connection to that person or satisfaction from doing that. In fact, there's another study done that showed that gamblers, when they would think about gambling, their brain actually produced as much dopamine or often more dopamine than when they were doing the gambling itself. And a lot of individuals in Silicon Valley who are very much responsible for the way things like Instagram work are incentivized to build social media apps in a way that reflects this constant dopamine hit to, in essence, get people mildly addicted to using their apps themselves. Last but not least, there was research done on the brain in love that revealed that deep pair bonding is what activates oxytocin-rich pathways, meaning that scrolling is not replacing intimacy. Intimacy and long-term pair bonding are much more oxytocin-based and even vasopressin-based, particularly in men, whereas scrolling and dopamine are essentially all about novelty. Now, does this mean that it's just okay to be in this type of situation in a relationship? And while that is a very individual question, because some people in a relationship will say, yeah, my partner can do whatever they want. I don't want to be controlling of my partner following people on Instagram. Other people might feel very differently. And the very first step to healing is to figure out where the line in the sand exists for you. And once you've defined that line in the sand, you want to be able to actually have a healthy conversation. If you want some help and support with this, you can check out our individuation course. It helps you really get clear on your needs, your values and morals, the things that light you up. It helps you create a mission and vision for each area of your life, discover who you are in your career and around money and mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, relationships, really dive into self-discovery and deeper questioning, and it'll help you build a significant relationship to yourself. So you can check it out fully for free for 7 days. And that is more than enough time to download the whole workbook and get through the whole course. It's only a couple hours in length. Plus you get a free giveaway for life, which is our How to Heal from a Breakup course. In case you ever go through a breakup, even in family relationships or a friendship breakup, it will help so much to move through it more quickly. And that's just for a couple of days that we're running this. So I want to just ask you for a moment, what is your boundary around the situation? Perhaps it's something along the lines in a middle ground of saying, I don't mind if this person follows people on Instagram, but it's absolutely not acceptable for my partner to be reaching out to them directly and trying to have conversations. Or I don't mind if my partner follows somebody on Instagram, but if it's all that their Instagram is made up of, then obviously that's going to make me feel uncomfortable and maybe say something about how they're operating as a person. Other individuals at more polar ends of this kind of conversation might say, I don't care at all. People can do what they do and I will do the same. Whereas others might say, actually, this is really painful and hurtful in a relationship. And I want to be mindful that there's no exact right or wrong answer here. It's about self-consideration and individuation. It's about you deciding what truly makes you feel safe, not from a people-pleasing perspective, not from pretending to be something other than you are perspective, but by actually listening to your own internal guidance system and moving truthfully and authentically from that in integrity to yourself. And this really requires you, if you're not sure of this answer, to know your needs and standards. And I want to ask you, what are your standards for respect in a relationship? What are your needs and standards around loyalty? What does that look like? And a lot of times people go from relationship to relationship, never asking themselves this question. And because something isn't clear, it allows these boundaries that do exist there subconsciously, whether you're clear consciously about them or not, it allows these boundaries to frequently get violated. And it will essentially create a lot of emotional and distrust debt in the relationship, where somebody might constantly feel like they're just not able to fully be themselves or open up, or they're constantly feeling like they're looking over their shoulder, and that will affect the relationship in other ways. So there is incentive to actually be able to communicate this. So take a moment to really reflect on those questions. And then your next step is to make sure that you openly have this conversation. And here's what might happen. If you have this honest conversation about, hey, here's what my standards are and boundaries are around these types of situations. Where are you coming from? What are your boundaries in this type of situation? If you communicate clearly and directly and in a healthy, assertive way, the vast majority of the time, somebody's going to be like, okay, I can meet you there. I can meet you part way. But there may be a time that somebody says, I don't care how you feel. I'm not going to show up for those things at all. And that process of communicating, as scary and as vulnerable as it might be, is going to give you so much information about who you're with, how able this person is to consider your feelings and be mindful of you. Because truly, and I say this as somebody who saw thousands of dismissive avoidant clients when I was running my practice, people in workshops, truly, the vast majority of dismissive avoidants are going to consider your boundaries and be mindful of them and thoughtful of them. Maybe even just say, yeah, I'm not going to go unfollow all these people from my account, but I won't have a password on my phone, just so you feel like there's this air of transparency around the relationship. And I will be validating to you that I'm not reaching out to anybody or talking to anybody. So in the very least, you should be able to have some sort of healthy middle ground of compromise if this is something that's an issue for you. And what you then have to do is vet how the person responds and decide whether or not that's a worthwhile relationship for you to be investing in. If somebody's like, I'm not going to make space and time to empathize with or validate your feelings at all, I'm going to write you off, I'm going to diminish your emotions around the situation, then that will also tell you about how this person is going to handle conflict in the long haul in many different types of situations. Whereas if that person is able to find a healthy middle ground with you and communicate about it, then obviously that shows that this person has the capacity to move from a productive point of view in a relationship. Now, here's another really important thing that I think we have to note is that you have to make sure that you are not falling into the trap of comparing yourself to other people online. Because we all know online can have all these different filters and people can take thousands or hundreds of pictures to find the perfect one at the perfect angle with the perfect light. I mean, there's so much that goes into that. And you're essentially often comparing your everyday normal moments to this person's best moments after so many tries. That just causes you to move down a slippery slope. I also think that it is so important to recognize that the more that you are individuated, the more you know who you are, what you need, what you want, what makes you tick, what lights you up, the more you feel confident in your deep sense of self, and you are not hinging your sense of self and self-worth on your appearance, the more you are going to be in a place where you feel intrinsically confident. And if we try to identify and hinge our entire sense of self-worth on the way that we look, what a devastating and shallow way to treat ourselves. And if you are somebody who feels that you fall into that trap frequently, it's actually most often a symptom of the fact that you haven't individuated enough yet, meaning you haven't really figured out out who you are deeply enough to recognize that you are so much more than just your physical appearance. And this is a huge trap that people fall into and honestly can stay in their whole lives at times. So let's talk about some ancient wisdom that lines up with all of the neuroscience and psychological principles that we've covered so far. The Buddha literally says, do not compare yourself with others or you may become vain or bitter, for there will always be greater and lesser persons than yourself. And honestly, this exists in so many different areas. Sometimes somebody's going to have one strength in one area and you're going to have another strength in another. Lao Tzu says, when you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everyone will respect you. And I think this really highlights that healing comes from resting in your own self-worth. Healing comes from really knowing who you are deep down. And in Proverbs 14:30, it says, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. And we often compare when we are seeking certainty or reassurance or control. In fact, the subconscious questions that usually drive comparison are rooted in fears and old wounds. Thought processes like, am I good enough? Do I need to look more like ABC or become more like this person in order to be worthy or loved? But in all of these cases, we are moving from the outside in. We are trying to gain love by contorting and changing ourselves into what we think the outside world wants from us. And the outside world is always changing. It is the most fragile place to ever derive your sense of self-identity. And in fact, the more that you try to derive your sense of self and identity from the outside in, the more sensitive you will be to rejection. Because the moment somebody rejects you, you'll be sitting there going, oh my gosh, I must be this way because they said that to me. Whereas if you know who you truly are and what you truly want, if somebody rejects your dreams or your goals, but you're dead set on them, it doesn't have the power to affect you in the same way. And the same thing happens as you start to know yourself more deeply as a person. If somebody rejects you outside of you, it can't hurt you in the same way when you know yourself and have built a self-trusting relationship. So we are much better off as individuals to move from the inside out and know ourselves and then live unapologetically from that place. Things like, what am I actually okay with in a relationship? Questions like, how does this actually make me feel? Or what do I need in this situation? Am I with somebody who is able and willing to respect these things? And you can even check in and see if I give the same respect around those things in return. And by asking yourself these questions and moving from that space, it has the capacity to truly up-level your relationships, but most importantly, starting in the relationship you have to yourself. So if you want to go deeper, check out that course. If you don't want to miss any of the daily videos I put out here, all about attachment styles, psychology, the neuroscience and ancient wisdom and where they all overlap in a non-dogmatic way, of course, please subscribe to this channel and I can't wait to see you in future videos.